All right, we're right back in. So now we're talking about the Cummins X15 series. Cummins released this motor right around 2017 and 2018 time frame. It was released in two models. One is for power and one is for fuel efficiency. This motor was supposed to be the redemption for the bad negative reputation Cummins was getting after the 871 2250 and the 2350 model ISX, right? So I first saw this motor in Dallas at the truck show and Great American Truck Show at the Cummins exhibit. I was very impressed. It seems like they really worked most of the kinks out of the emission system. See, one thing about to remember with the EPA and CARB at this during these different emission regulation points in time, they were making these standards very fast that the engine manufacturers sometimes even had to they had to really speed up production. They had to maybe even cut corners. We know in some cases when we see certain motors like the Navistar, what is it, the Navistar motor, that one in the N13s, or I think it's called an N13 motor, but the ones that were in the Pro Stars. But point being is that these standards were coming quicker than manufacturers really had time to prepare for them. So especially whenever you get like a 2008 2009 truck, that was when the DPF DOC first came out. Those tend to be more problematic because it was the first years, hasn't really had all the run time and the test time and all that good stuff. So adjustments were being made. Same thing with 2012 to 2014 is the next year trucks that I would not be wanting to buy, just because it's the first year of DEF, and the SCR. So that's 2012 to 2014. It was hard on the motor companies. It was so hard on the motor companies that we even had like CAT. They stopped making the Class 8 diesel motors. The emission rulemaking that added more parts to the motor, well, actually the after-treatment system in particular, that went into effect around 2012. That's when the SCR and DEF came into play, right? So really, 2008 and 2012 were the years to remember. 2004, 2008, 2012. And really they were, 4-year increments each time? 2004 to 2008 and from 8 to 12. So in a matter of 8 years, we get full-blown emissions, basically. Nowadays, motor manufacturers have had much more time and experience through trial and error. So when we see a motor like the X15 rolled out, they seem to figure out how to correct a lot of the things they previously had to rush due to compliance. So it's something to consider. If I was looking at one of the newer motors, I still probably... Yeah, I'm not going to get into saying which newer ones I wouldn't buy, but this is one that I would be more interested in, the Cummins X15, the fuel efficiency. Unless I was doing overweight, then maybe I'd get into power. And overweight being consistently hauling over 80,000 pounds for some reason. Or like mentioned earlier when we're talking about farm trucks and stuff, usually probably haul a little bit more than that. So besides this, I can't tell you much more about this motor. The feedback I've read and heard has all been pretty positive so far, but then again, there hasn't been a whole lot of time and experience shared, not as much as we'll see within 6 years of this motor being out, 6 to 10 years of this motor being out. We'll really get a good idea of what it can do in longevity. If I were to be getting a brand new truck, it would have to be one with this motor. Pretty much so, yeah. Alright, so let's move to this next one we got here. This is Volvo D12. This is pre-emission Volvo. Now, these motors pack a punch. They got a great reputation in some circles. The later Volvo motors, such as the D13 and up, have got not so great of a reputation. Yep. So I remember reading a post years ago off Truckerz report where a guy was talking about his D12, and at 1.7 million miles, he still never opened his motor up, to do it like liners or cylinders. I think he said he's something like no rebuild, same piston, same cylinder head. He said he put a couple injectors in over the years, and that was about it as far as major work. You'll see these D12s in Generation 1 Volvos pretty much only. They might have been in some of the GMC white Volvos before Volvo started this first truck, which is the Generation 1 Volvo. And this would be in the Volvos up until the year 2003. Maybe in a mid-roof, maybe in a full-size. This would be my fourth in line as far as what motor to pick. But it's a wild card. If the truck was in great shape and I like the owner, it may jump up to number 1 or 2 or 3 on my list. I'm just not too sure on parts availability, so I would have to check on that first. And also, I would like to know my local independent shops and how they feel about the D12. I would like to check with my guys here in town and see if they know about the D12, so that way I could just keep my motor out of Volvo and stuff like that. If I needed to do motor work. But yeah, if like the N14 and the Detroit 60 wasn't available or they weren't in great shape, and then maybe I would go for like that big cam Cummins just to really get simplified. Then I would just probably use that truck to, I don't know, maybe just haul farm loads around, or I'd still take that truck over the road too. It just wouldn't get that great fuel mileage. But it'd be dependable, super dependable, no computer on it. In conclusion, on motors, I say right here, this is what you want, right? A motor that you can take care of and that you can count on when you make your deals. When you make your deals, you just want to be able to go. You don't want 15 different emission sensors that can knock you down and knock you over and take you out of place and do whatever. You want to be able to work on it yourself, preferably. I mean, even if that's like just in a pinch, so you're like, okay, I got this situation real quick. It's going to take 3 hours to get into this shop, or like road call is going to be expensive. So it's like, okay, but I got the hose in my truck. I got a couple things right here. I know how to drain the coolant real quick into a bucket, that I can just fix this hose real quick and I can be done before they even get here. So even if it's in a pinch, it's something that we want to be able to work on ourselves, not have all these different layers of emissions. Just any truck that's like newer than 2012, just look under the hood, right? It's just a ton of stuff going on compared to if you see guys with older trucks that are like pre-2004. See if you can like look under the hood with them and get them to show you what it looks like, and you'll start seeing like the simplicity of the two. And for it to be cost effective on parts, and for it to be a motor that everyone knows how to work on. So these are some pretty key points in why I chose the motor list that I did, and I introduced these motors in from many years of being in this trucking business, but because these motors pretty much hit this whole list. A motor that we can take care of and that we can count on, because a lot of these motors down here, as long as we just drive them decent and don't dog them out and drive them and hot rod them all hard and stuff, and keep the oil up on it and keep the fuel clean, then like pretty much these motors just want oil, fresh oil filters, and diesel. Then the truck wants its grease, right? Then we get the next one, which is being able to work on it ourselves. Way more accessibility, simple designs. A lot of the parts can be changed with hand tools. And then cost effective on parts. A lot of these pre-emission motors, the parts have been out for so long. You got aftermarket parts that are just as built just as well, and they've been around for a while. So there's plenty of people have made the designs, and which also makes the manufacturer, like Cummins, they've come down on prices compared to what they sell now for newer trucks. Then a motor that everyone knows how to work on. N14s have been around forever. Detroit 60s, these Cat 6NCs, they've been around forever. So pretty much every shop knows what to do with one. And a lot of even like a dealership, a lot of times they'll be, sometimes they'll have to get one of their older mechanics or whatever. But even then, they're usually relieved to have an older truck where they're like, oh man, there's not so much. This is easy working compared to the newer. All right, page 48. Let's continue. Whether it's an N14, the Detroit 60, this D12 I just mentioned, or another one. Just use this guide of motors to get you going in the right direction. Do as much research as you can on truckersreport.com with an account and stuff. It's all free. And raws.com, you have to ask to be a member. And just basically, we just be observant at that point. Listen to the older truck owners and see what has worked and what hasn't worked for them. Take note of the successful owner operators at the truck stops. What type of motor does he or she have? And by successful, I'm usually talking about more so the ones that have paid off trucks, financial freedom, and freedom of time. Right? There are successful people in newer trucks, yes, but you have to really kind of vet them out and make sure that they are as successful as they seem. A lot of these guys, those guys that stick their chest out like they're so bad, but really are one breakdown away from being out of business. So instead of telling you to avoid the same situation that he or she's in, that he or she is pretending that, oh, we're making it off so well. Yeah, you just get you one of these trucks and just lease it to one of these companies and just haul this type of freight, and you don't even need a trailer and all this type of stuff. But really, what I found to be that is a lot of that is misleading. So you got to be careful, when you're looking to see, but you can still talk to really anybody, and just in your vetting process, you'll realize, you're like, oh, okay, so this, you got to just, it becomes a tactic, a skill eventually, where you're more so like, you can tell who's got their trucks paid off, who really doesn't have to move their trucks, who really gets to do what they want, who, when they tell you that they just made $3,000 on a load that was like 700 miles or 400 miles, you really believe these folks because they have no reason to lie. They're just chilling. They figured it out. So, and these are the people, the two that also will probably actually stop what they're doing to help, if you need to fix something on your truck, or they'll know how to do it because they've already done it before. Unlike this person who's got this chest poked out with their new 2014 truck or 16 or 18 truck, and they're just scratching, man. They're like $3,000 to $5,000 in, maybe, in the bank, and they're like, oh yeah, just jump on in, right? So this is why we need to survey as many people as we can, as like saving up before you start your business. Okay, so this is like just a little tip here I'm giving. I was like, to survey as many people as you can as you save up to start your business, right? If you've already started your business, cool, but we still need to be out here collecting this real life information. It pays to collect firsthand experience from others, especially in our beginning stages. The first 2 or 3 years of owning our business, especially if we're not mechanically inclined already, it's great to be out and just experiencing and getting this firsthand experience from others, with others, whoever's willing to talk. If you're, even if you're the person helping in this situation, hold a tool, or, there's a lot of cool people out here still, for sure. The more information you collect, the better you can make an informed decision on which truck you should get, and where you should take it to, how your operation style is going to be. All these things that we're discussing now, you're getting to get a really great look inside of what it all looks like. So, then it just comes to just collecting more experiences, so you can just weigh out all your options. Then you can boom, based off the information of your own. That way, you make your own cognitive decisions, so you can feel great about going in that direction. Many make the mistake of listening to one person's opinion on something and then making big decisions based off that, right? You can ask 10 people their opinions on the same motor and you may get a range of answers. But it's up to you, right, the individual, to find the trend of truth in those answers. There should be a little bit of truth to all those answers, and you can find the trend in it. And it's also up to you to find the success in those replies, right? Just to see what those replies are worth, because sometimes you could throw out some replies when you could tell that, hey, it didn't matter what type of motor this person was going to touch, it was going to be not one that was going to work, because he would have found a way to, or she would have found a way to like tear it apart regardless. So it's kind of, that person might tell you that anything is garbage, but really maybe only 20% of what this person is saying is really garbage, but the other 80% is garbage because of how they treat it, and how they handle it. A man with a fast mindset and a lack of initiative will find a way to mess almost anything up. Yeah, pretty much, right? Just like moving too fast, but not taking the initiative to like take care of stuff, But so what if he's the one telling you don't do this and do that, right? So just be careful, especially if you're younger, going through this these video modules of mine in this book, in this H2ST, because just because they're older doesn't mean they know all this stuff, right? So the reason why something didn't work for him or her may not apply to you, because you actually, are driving your truck probably more easy and well. You don't accelerate so hard. You fix things a certain way, right? You change your filters and oil on time. You keep a big reserve of money in the bank, and you keep your home bills low, and etc. Right? So it's just different applications. So maybe it wasn't the motor. Maybe it was just this driver. This owner operator. So you can still learn valuable lessons from people that didn't quite make it. But, I just say here, just be aware, just be careful, and that, age doesn't always equate to experience. And we know that misery loves company, and many unsuccessful owner operators get into the bad habit, or get into the negative habit of hanging around listening to, like basically, if you want to say like a loser club. It's like a loser mentality. You know what I mean? At the time of the writing, I said the losers, but too much, and they let other people's shortcomings become their own. There's power in proximity. So, right, we need to be mindful of who we're hanging around. Because, especially when we only have like a couple of hours at the end of the day, to relax, meditate, eat, clean, hygiene, whatever we're deciding to do, go walk around, take some photos, get some meals, go to a bar, whatever, right? But like to hang around and just, especially if it gets to be like a group of like 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, and they're just talking about like, yeah, there's no money in trucking, can't make it, and dispatchers, the game is slanted against us, and with all these high lease payments and truck, especially when we get into like lease operator conversations, it's like it's a mentality that if you don't already have this mentality, you might as well not hang around it, because you don't want that mentality to infect you and get into that mind state where you attract this negativity. Because it's just as negative as they say, but this also comes to a point where our mentality, we attract that negativity. So that's why there's also power in proximity. So be mindful of who you decide to hang around when you spend your time. I know this is all basic information. A lot of this is basic information, but I continue to reiterate it just because of its importance to what we're doing. And plus, repetition is what makes us actually remember and hold on to it. Retention. So, if you've been doing this long enough, let me check my recording. Okay, boom, 19 minutes. Let's get back in. If you've been doing this long enough, there's always somebody out here that's complaining about something, right? So we must be solution oriented. We must be the one that looks for solutions and not problems. So what's the answer to this? How can we fix this? How can we fix this? Even if it just means just not, just being still and silent for a moment. It's just like, okay, instead of just over identifying problems, we're looking for solutions. As long as we are always looking for ways to improve and do things better, we'll begin to naturally shy away from these dead-end conversations with, individuals who are complaining at the truck stop. When you're out here consistently being successful, you just don't really have time for, in addition of problems, because we have our own problems, but we're more solution oriented, so we get through them. So, but yeah, we're not really looking for the problems, more so the solutions and the answers. So it becomes to a point where, like, solutions and answers, to me, it just became way more of a pleasant conversation. I'd much rather build me, my friends and family, people who I do business with, like, we're solution and answer oriented. So we might identify a problem, but then we get right onto the solution and answer side. We don't spend too much time on problems, or basking in the the fact of the matter, or whatever. That, yeah, there's a problem. It's just like, okay, a problem identified, solution, let's go. So success has very much to do with our mentality, which is an ongoing process, right? Chapter 2. Which motors would I avoid? And some other things to watch out for. Okay, so I just gave you pretty much like my running hit list. And these are all pretty much pre-emission motors, but I gave a couple motors outside the pre-emission motors. And if the motor's not on the list, it's a reason why it's not on this list. And, I probably am aware of this motor, and I chose not to put on this list. Doesn't mean that, it's a horrible motor, or that you're just out of luck or whatever. No, we can make it work with pretty much any of these motors. But these are the motors that I would be looking out for, as you stack and save cash, and you can make a move on another truck, or you want to you get an opportunity comes up, and you could do that or do that. Or, it also, at the very least, will show you things to be, mindful of, as far as emissions and what the emission systems are doing and stuff, and which we'll talk about that more in maintenance, and the universal application to every motor. We just got to stay, if you're having one of these newer emission trucks and it's not one of the ones on the list, we just got to really stay ahead of it. We'll talk about oil bypass filters, which is an additional oil filter to help keep the soot down, and really that's what we got to do, is help keep the soot down. So let's continue into the next part of this chapter, which is which motors would I avoid, and some other things to watch out for. I would not buy these motors, okay, which we talked on earlier, which is this Navistar N13, also known as the Max Force, right? Do I explain this? Okay, yeah. So I go on to explain some more of this, but yeah, I would not get this Navistar 13. It got a horrible reputation. We'll talk about it. I wouldn't get any Volvo motor after 2003, just to be honest with you. This is just me personally, my opinion. We're inside my Andrews Method class, and this is my conclusion. I'm not saying that you can't make it in one of these motors, but me personally, I would not buy one. Maybe they've gotten better, but I definitely wouldn't have gotten one pre 2108, right? But actually 2018. Okay. Wouldn't get a PACCAR motor. I wouldn't get an ISX 2250 or 2350. That means I wouldn't get a Cummins ISX from the year 2012 up to 2000 or newer, because then you'll get into the X15 once they stop making this motor. So I wouldn't get any Cummins ISX from 2012 and beyond. Then we start the X series. I wouldn't get one of those Caterpillar motors that got the twin turbo. I don't know what they're called, C15s or something like that. It was made in like 2008, probably up until like maybe 2010-ish. I don't know. But it's after the 3406 motors. You started getting into some of these, early emissions, then the emission cap motors, and a couple of those models, or at least one of them, has this twin turbo, and those are very expensive turbos, and it's just like, yeah, unless you just really have an application where you think you need two turbos. I wouldn't really buy the Detroit motors either. Anything past the 2007. Those Detroit 60s or the 12 or whatever they continue to call Detroit after they became emission. But the first emission Detroit motors from 2004 to 2006ish and 7, they seem to be pretty decent too. But the ones after 2008, no go. I wouldn't, not me personally. Some guys do well with the 2008, but me personally, I wouldn't want it. I was just getting asked some help at a truck stop recently in Max Meadows, Virginia, and he was showing me, he's been an owner operator for like 4 or 5 months. He's gotten off to a decent start, but we were looking at his motor because he thought he had some oil mixing into his coolant. And I was just looking at his motor. I was like, man, first thing I wanted to identify where his oil cooler was so I could show him. But it just had so much stuff on it. I was like, golly, man, it's not that serious. Probably like a 2012 or 2014 Detroit motor. I was like, man. The Max Forces have, and I showed him the M14 too. I had to show him just the difference of the simplicity. He was like, man, okay. He's like, I'm getting one. I was like, well, look, I'm not saying that you have to get this one. I'm just showing you like the difference between the pre-emissions motor and then all this other stuff that we've become responsible for maybe a little bit more of a MPG boost. So, but yeah, especially because I didn't get to know that until years on. I thought it was only one way to run a truck, and it had to be like a newer truck and stuff like that, and old trucks were junk and all that stuff that they want us to think. So here's another so these Max Forces, right? You'll see these trucks for super cheap. The N13 Max Force is like a international, and then they got the Max Force. They have a horrible reputation for being junk, basically, for being just not motors to run a business on. They've had many lawsuits. Probably something to do with their emission system. I don't know. But that's one reason why it's so much cheaper when you see a truck with this motor in it. Nobody in their right mind wants it. Yeah, at the time of writing this book, man, I was pretty sliced with the sword. But yeah, serious, really nobody that that is aware of these trucks really want these trucks. So be very careful if you have a ISX to 2012 or newer, Cummins ISX, which is the 2250 model or the 2350 model, right? This is a very important thing to know, is that these motors have a high pressure fuel pump that has a negative reputation, very negative reputation. These ceramic plungers inside the pump have broken and entered the oil. Right, you got these little ceramic plungers inside, and they just go up and down, high pressure fuel pump. And after a certain amount of miles, I'll say down here about 250, 300,000 miles, they have a reputation for just breaking. Then they'll go off into the oil, and these little tiny pieces of ceramic gets all into the different nooks and crannies and galleyways of oil, and it's almost impossible to flush all that out. And it just left a lot of people with a stuck motor. Like, dang, what to do next? So that's why it's so important to know. Once these little pieces enter the oil, it's pretty much over with, as explained. You either have to replace your whole motor with a brand new crate engine, or you have to trust that every piece of those little plungers have been removed from every little path of oil, because later on, if one of those little pieces get crammed in a place where it's not supposed to be, who knows? Because you're going to bend, break, or scar up something in your motor with that piece. It's sad. A lot of people went down like this. Yep, sure did. If you already have one of these motors, don't worry too much, but consider changing this pump ASAP if you haven't already. And make sure you get the one with the steel plungers, the updated steel, and change it out ASAP if it has over 300,000 miles on it. You know, a lot of people that I know that have this motor, they do not let this fuel pump go beyond 300. You know, and a few guys will, they'll even change it at 200 or 250. So they now have the updated plungers that are made of steel, and for the most part, it's been a great workaround, and it's been working better. But the plungers can still break, the steel ones. So we want to keep it right around that 250 mark. So if I own this motor, I would count on changing this fuel pump out for a new one. Or if you're knowing somebody locally that knows how to rebuild the tappets, they're called tappets, Tappetts. You just rebuild the head and replace the tappets. I'd be looking to do that every 250,000 miles. Very important preventive maintenance for these newer ISXs 2012 and up. 2250 and 2350. Personally, I would just avoid automatic transmissions altogether. Yep. They seem convenient, but the extra electronics and sensors involved almost always make it an unnecessary, well, I don't want to say always, but can make it an unnecessary variable. Right? Because if the truck's not shifting, you can't move, and if it's a wire harness thing, if it's a computer thing, and if it's a sensor thing, if it's like some plate thing in the automatic transmission, if it's like a weird, like it might have different type of clutches that are weird, like I don't know, different connections, whatever makes it automatic, like some type of plate in there. It's just all these different unnecessary things when we know we could just shift our own gears, right? We've been doing it. You know, we know it's nice to have automatic in traffic and stuff, but again, I just put this out there, then it'll be your choice ultimately. And maybe some of the newer automatics have got, where there's not so many parts involved, or maybe there's more parts involved in the sensors and stuff. I don't know. If you buy a Volvo or a PACCAR motor, just be prepared to get turned down at some shops because they don't have the software, the specialty tools, or maybe even mechanics to work on them. That's one downside to having a motor that is built from the same brand as the truck. It starts to limit you to pretty much it starts to limit you to dealerships more, right? So we're talking about like a PACCAR motor, which is built by PACCAR trucks who make Peterbilt and Kenworth. They kind of keep all the computers and certain tools and keep it within the network. Very similar to, what Volvo has done. It gets less and less to find, outside mechanics and independent shops, or even TAs and Petros that are, that can do too much outside of the regular on it. Especially when we come to independent shops. Maybe TA Petros and stuff, they've probably been getting better at some of these newer motors. Maybe Volvo and PACCAR, but my guess is still just very entry-level jobs. Detroit 60 Series has its famous bull gear stories, of course, but it must not happen too often because everyone still loves this old motor, right? This old man motor, right? Just keep this bull gear in mind when you're buying and asking your questions, right? And you can research it further on truckersreport.com. The twin turbo cat has never really had a great reputation, and the turbos are expensive, and you need two of them, right? And here's something to keep in mind. Don't get too excited about when someone's trying to sell you on the phrase fleet maintained. Like, hey, this truck has been fleet maintained, right? In most cases, fleets are too busy running their trucks to really maintain them that well. Especially when we talk about the mega fleets and the giant, the large fleets of like beyond 500 trucks. They just want those trucks to last good and long enough to trade them in after their deal is up in probably 3 to 4 years. So fleet drivers can sure tear up some trucks too, right? Because they're just driving. It's not their job to like take care of a truck really. They just drive, fast acceleration, fast braking, lugging up hills sometimes. Who knows? Be careful if you're buying a used fleet truck from one of these big trucks companies. All right, it's just a lot of that to keep in mind. And it's inside pre-purchase inspection too. We get definitely into more detailed about like specific questions, and when we're looking into buying a truck, like the actual buying process. So let's continue, because we're still like in the selective process of like selecting high probability trucks from what that's going to be a moneymaker. So we talked about motors, so let's talk about trucks. Okay, so like I said earlier, mostly all trucks are built pretty well. So I'll share with you some things I like and dislike about each brand. So, and for the record, I've only owned Peterbilt and Volvo. So I definitely have experience in the ownership of these two brands. You know, the shops, the dealerships, the parts, the people, and etc. But I've pretty much drove every brand of truck at one point and collected a lot of info over the years from conversations with owner-operators and successful owner-operators, of course, right? So my personal truck favorite for business is what they call the Generation 1 Volvo. Or the Gen 1 Volvo, which stands for Generation 1. They were produced until 2003. This is the first real generation of Volvo trucks after transitioning from being Volvo GMC White. It was like one conglomerate company, GMC White. So those are the older looking Volvos, got the more triangular shaped noses. But these Gen 1 Volvos are, you know, I just like the way they're built. They're just built plain right, in my opinion. They come with all four of the popular pre-emission motors, the Detroit 60, N14, Cat 6 and Z, and Volvo D12. If you are looking to buy a Gen 1 Volvo, try searching Craigslist in major hub cities like Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, Dallas, and Houston. Type N14 or Detroit 60 or Volvo D12 and etc. You know, there's plenty. They are still out here. I wouldn't hesitate to pay $20,000 for one in nice shape. They can still be found around $10,000-$15,000 if someone is not realizing its value, or if it's not in so great a shape, or, you know, it's been a little rough or snowed out, or got a little rust on the fenders or something like that. Still find some really nice ones pop up for like $30,000 that are like really in great shape, like new motors, look nice, paint jobs. So if you time the year of your truck just right, as far as like you get like a 2007 or 8, or I mean not 2000, like a 97 or a 98, you can still get a Generation 1 Volvo or another brand of truck and avoid ABS regulations, right? All trucks manufactured before March 1st, 1997 are not required to be in compliance with ABS regulations at all. No ABS sensors, no valves, no gotcha tickets from your ABS light going flash on and off. So keep that in mind too. If you find a truck that was built, you see the build date before March 1st, 1997, you won't have to be in compliance with any ABS. One less responsibility. You know, as far as just the cost of parts that come with ABS, and you know, ABS works great when it needs to work, but it's like it's pretty much 80% of the cost on it is just like it is 80% of the failure on it has nothing to even do with what, you know, it's just like the compliance has more so to do with just the system, like electronics and sensor gaps, and like it's just weird things that it causes a little frustration from time to time staying compliant with ABS when there's really no real issue, but there's ABS. Yeah, I'll let you make your own opinion on that, right? But March 1st is the cutoff date, 1997. Peterbilt. All right, Peterbilt is made by PACCAR, and so is Kenworth. Peterbilt is the first brand of truck that I owned. It was a 387 model with the 871 ISX in it, which is a 2009 model truck. It was a pretty good truck overall. It definitely looked good, right? I would not recommend getting the 587, which was the one that came after the 387. That model is the newer model of the 387. I have a close friend, you know, who has owned this truck, and something about the suspension on it just doesn't seem right. He tells me that the dealers tell him, you know, about many 587 owners, they just go through shocks and other suspension parts almost like it's nothing sometimes, you know, just maybe the weight of the cab or something, or the build or the angles of the shocks and stuff. If I were buying a Peterbilt, I'd probably be going for like an early model 387, because they do actually have some. I've seen 387s that have pre-emission motors, Or I would just go all the way old school with a 379. With an N14 or Detroit. Though these 379s are not a fuel efficient design, the ease of working on the motor in one of these long nose trucks is a lot easier. It's drastically increased because with the long hood design, the motor sits further up in the chassis, so this allows pretty much complete access to all the parts on the motor, including the back of the motor. So the motor's not dug way back in the in the doghouse, as we call it, but the motor sits further up, so you could really actually just reach everything on the motor pretty much. Most modern trucks today have the motor buried so deep in the doghouse that reaching the back cylinders, the back wiring harnesses or coolant hoses can really be a pain and make a small job a lot bigger of a job. But then we got the big long nose hood. It is what it is. But at least the 379s, they retain their value. They're not going to really do as much for fuel mileage because of its just not being an aerodynamic shape. But the ease of working on them goes way up. Probably a lot more difficult to drive and back up those trucks. I don't know. I've never drove a truck with that long of a hood. Wouldn't be completely against it, but I'd maybe go for like a Freightliner Classic style hood. Start going out there, but not all the way like a W900 hood, like way out there. So pros of Peterbilt. The brand of parts TRP. They make almost everything. Peterbilt and Kenworth that the OEM makes, they pretty much they make almost an alternative to almost everything that's OEM, from airbags to different parts and shocks, not shocks, but like suspension parts, and you'll see TRP all over the stores there. They have cheaper price and they're usually stocked at all the Peterbilt Kenworth dealers all across the country. You'll usually see these TRP parts, and I wouldn't hesitate to buy mostly everything that TRP makes, even like like air dryer filters and stuff. It's all good stuff. It's a nice alternative to the full price OEM parts. We got American made. The Peterbilt is kind of like America's truck, right? The long nose Petes are pretty much the most depicted truck in the movies and etc. So almost everybody seems to like a Peterbilt. The old school guys especially love the older 379s. This truck still holds its value very well to this day. It's not uncommon to see a decent 379 with over 1 million miles on it still going for $40,000 plus. Peterbilts in general hold their value pretty well, right? So when you go to resell this truck later on, you still be able to get a pretty good amount for it, right? And the Peterbilts they do tend to ride pretty well as far as suspension goes. Now the cons, I've noticed that they don't really have that great of a turning radius. So I can't really turn as sharp in them. I noticed I had to back up. I just couldn't turn as sharp as if I needed to. On plenty of occasions, I found myself having to back up, to finish making a turn, especially on turns that didn't seem like I would need to. The Peterbilt name brand parts are pretty expensive at times, and I was not impressed at all by the way my 387 was wired up. Like the harnesses, right? So especially behind the dashboard and around the motor. I remember troubleshooting for a repair and going behind my dashboard to check my wiring, and it looked like it was wired. I say by the elementary school project. No, it just looked like it was wired by like whoever or whatever. It just doesn't matter. There were wires all over the place. Stuff was disconnected. Labels were worn off. Nothing was really zip tied together and organized. It was just like, wow. So basically, it was just very unorganized, and that made me very unconfident in the wiring of the truck. But there is a chance that it got like this from the previous owner. But the truck had only been out for 3 or 4 years, and it was with Prime. So Prime doesn't cut into the stuff like that. Like, I don't know, it might have been a little mixture, but I really didn't like the fact that my main fuse box was outside under the hood. It was just weird to me. It just seemed like a weird place to put it. So putting the fuse box outside helps expose it to to the elements. And by placing it so close to the motor, all this heat is just transferring from the motor and can affect like the lifespan of my relays because of wire temperature. All right, take a quick pause.